Alright guys, welcome back to Formula 1 news. It seems the situation at Red Bull is potentially even more dire than we may have believed, with rumours starting to emerge that they are bringing back many of their resources that were planned for next year's 2025 car, the RB21, to try and fix the major glaring issues with this year's RB20. If it works, it's the right move for Red Bull. If it doesn't, they're not just sacrificing this year's development, but also next year's championship challenge, especially for Max Verstappen, is a big question mark as well, even though this year's title is not yet over either. Very much interested in your thoughts in the comments below. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you're new as always. I greatly appreciate it. This is Charles Leclerc. Bit of an incident here with his Ferrari, but yeah, no further investigation required on this one. Plenty of things going on today. Let's talk about some of the Formula 2 drivers. Teo Pourchaire, the current champion, he admits that he's in a tough spot. He's not got money like some of the other drivers to put on the table to get a drive, and I think Teo Pourchaire really wrong place, wrong time for many. Ends up in a team that maybe the opportunity isn't really there. Whereas for guys like Doohan, for guys like Colapinto, maybe for guys like Bortoleto, they find themselves in maybe a slightly more promising position in terms of being for a team that have opportunities up the grid, and that's not really emerged with Pourchaire. It's unfortunate, but other Formula 2 drivers, they are getting the chance. Oliver Bearman will be driving the Haas at the Azerbaijan Grand Prix. This is going to be pretty fascinating to see how close he's going to be able to get to Nico Hülkenberg this weekend. Can he keep it clean? Because we know that he's driving next year for Haas alongside Esteban Ocon, but he's going to be in the baptism of fire again, having raced Jeddah earlier in the year and now racing here at Baku. Not exactly easy tracks. He's also going to become, by the way, the first driver in basically 2 decades to substitute in for two different teams in the same season. Vettel did it for BMW and Toro Rosso back in 2007. I think he might have scored points for both of those teams. So, and of course, Bearman scored points for Ferrari. Scoring points with Haas, though, this weekend will be a far greater achievement than that. And this time he does get the full allocation of practice right for Jeddah. Sainz raced on the Friday, not raced, but you know what I mean, did the practice sessions on the Friday. Bearman had one FP3 session, straight into qualifying, did a very solid job, and an excellent race on Sunday, of course, ending up 7th, and just fantastic work in that Ferrari. But of course, that was a very fast car, whereas the Haas is more midfield, kind of back in the midfield type situation. So it's going to be interesting to see how Bearman copes with that as his kind of second outing here in Formula 1. But, not an easy couple of races to do, Jeddah and Baku. Baku's a tight track. Yes, it's in some ways it's kind of simple, 90-degree corners, a lot of, rear limitation on the cars in that particular circuit. But nonetheless, it's easy to bin it in the wall, either at the castle section, famously as many have done, or going into the start of the final sector. It's got that very long straight, of course, very fast indeed. So, we'll see if Bearman can keep it clean and keep it out of the wall, and that will be a success in some parts. But equally, Bearman, we think, is very good at this track. Well, I watched the entirety of last year's Formula 2 kind of Grand Prix weekend around this track, and Bearman had one of the greatest ever weekends in Formula 2 at this track last year. He secured pole position for the weekends with a broken steering rod. So, I think he might have hit the wall or something like that happened earlier, and his default steering position where the tyres were going dead straight was actually with the steering wheel slightly to the left-hand side. So when he was on the straight, he had to hold the wheel at an angle, and through the corners he had to turn more than anticipated to the left and less than anticipated to the right. And even with that problem, he still got pole for the feature race, which he eventually converted on the Sunday into the win, and he won the sprint as well from 10th on the grid. Now, yes, last year's Prema was better than this year's Prema, and people say, oh, well, Formula 2's a spec series, is just about the drivers. Not true. Like, everyone knows some of the cars have performance differentials, and certainly the engines have performance differentials as well. The Mechachrome engines, they do vary on reliability and performance, although they'll try not to tell you that. So it's a bit of a fraudulent championship in some ways, and I think if Bearman does a stellar job in the Haas, it is going to prove how those Formula 2 standings are not really representative of actually who the good drivers are out there, which isn't really a great sign, but I think it's probably true in reality. So we'll see how Bearman does, but he was phenomenal here last year in Formula 2. He's obviously going to drive a Haas this year. Anywhere near the points would be, I think, a pretty outstanding achievement. Rumours as well about Seb's return. Now, this is coming up again. We talked about it a while ago about potentially Audi, because Audi have a seat that needs to be filled alongside Nico Hülkenberg, and we know that from the off, there was talk with Audi about they want to be the German team. When they first announced their arrival into Formula 1, they pretty much were taking shots at Mercedes Mercedes, saying, oh yeah, Mercedes, the German team with, the British drivers based in the UK, right, okay, German brand. But in many respects, Mercedes feels like effectively a British team, whereas Audi were like, look, we're going to be a proper German team with proper German drivers. And look, they've got Hülkenberg on board. Vettel is maybe, look, if he's interested in a return, Audi will be interested in him. Bonotto's over there. Jonathan Wheatley is over there. Both of them experience with Sebastian Vettel. Whether it's really a good idea or whether it'll happen still seems very unlikely. But even Helmut Marko recently suggested that Vettel is open to the possibility, and he's been driving in a few things as of late. So I wouldn't completely rule it out. I'm not sure it's the right move from either party, but it is a move. And if you are Audi, your seat is rather attractive. Yes, your car is terrible right now. The Sauber is awful. Worst car on the grid by some way. But Bottas wants that drive. Bortoletto wants that drive. A couple of other, juniors want the drive, as maybe does Sebastian Vettel, which does throw things potentially for a loop. Couple of quick things on McLaren. They were playing down at their performance in Monza. Not a great weekend for the team, really. Yes, they had a 1-2 from qualifying, but that didn't go much further than that. They lost the race to Charles Leclerc. Stella says, well, we weren't the fastest car. Leclerc was just as fast. He could stay with Oscar in the first stint, and sure, but and maybe that's how you defend your team and your drivers. But nonetheless, clearly mistakes were made on the McLaren side, and maybe mistakes were made as well from the pit wall side. This was from the recent Formula 1 Inside Story video they released today on that victory in Monza for Charles Leclerc, and there were a couple of times, I think we heard at least one of these, but papaya rules on the radio a couple of times. I'm not gonna lie, like if I was Lando or Oscar and I'm hearing papaya rules, how am I meant to take that? How am I meant to take papaya rules serious? Are you guys serious right now? I think there's some questions that need to be answered on that, to be honest. Let's talk Mercedes. They are still debating whether their new floor is actually good or not, because it's faster when on corners that the balance is maintained. The problem is the balance of the car has got worse since they brought the new floor, which they, haven't won with since they introduced it post-Spa. They tried to introduce that Spa, didn't work. They brought the old one in, and they won that Grand Prix with Lewis Hamilton, and of course it was, well, it would have been a 1-2, if not for Russell's eventual disqualification. So Toto says the balance is not good enough to keep the tyres happy, and that's one of the problems, right? Over a race distance, if your car is faster, but yet the tyres are degrading more because the car isn't balanced properly, that then hurts your race pace quite substantially. So Andrew Chauvelin is talking about how they've compared the packages, right? And yes, Monza's a bit of a unique track, but they compared the old one, the new one, and they're not really sure what to do. We're looking at the pressures that are generated across the car. We can correlate that with what we see in the wind tunnel. Gives us a decent read on whether it's doing what we expect it to be doing. It's important to note that they weren't expecting a very large gain. It's quite a small package we introduced, but we're confident that it's generating the load. The question is on the balance. So basically they say they're still considering what to do. They might go back to the old spec, which is pretty much what McLaren are not even risking doing. We saw yesterday rumours that McLaren have a big upgrade on the way. They don't want to bring it though, just in case it does what's happened to Mercedes, to Ferrari, and to Red Bull, all of their other top contenders this season. This is another interesting rumour that apparently Ferrari made an offer to Gianpiero Lambiase, current race engineer of Max Verstappen, to try and get him to leave Red Bull and come to Ferrari to be Hamilton's race engineer, which, if there's any statement to make as Ferrari, to say, look, we are here to become the top dogs, that is quite the statement, right? So, yeah, they might not be getting Newey, but the idea that they were trying to get GP away from Max, and GP was clearly like, no, I'm going to extend my contract and stay here. But then again, right, why not try? If you're Ferrari, you see Wheatley, you see Newey, you see others leaving. Maybe there's part of GP that thought about that, but I don't expect GP to ever part ways with Max, really. I feel like that relationship will, last for a very long time, and maybe when Max retires or leaves, either GP goes with him or, he goes to a different role within the organisation potentially. But let's talk about the situation at the top of the championship, because Red Bull are still leading the constructors, but that is probably going to come to an end in Baku based on the current trajectory. McLaren have closed in multiple points per round every weekend for a long time now, and that is likely to continue again. However, Ferrari are kind of out of nowhere really in the mix still. They're only 39 points behind Red Bull, they're only 31 points behind McLaren, definitely not over yet there, and Ferrari could potentially win the Constructors' title. It's not impossible. They can't win the drivers though, but neither can Checo Perez. He's talking about how he's been fighting all my life to be here at Red Bull. He admits he is towards the end of his career and there's not that much longer, but look, he's hoping that he's able to win a few more championships with the team. That seems unlikely. He does say though that his seat is never in doubt. Now maybe just Checo's saying this, but we saw him have that dinner with Yovidia, the top guy at Red Bull, the overall Red Bull, right, the main company yesterday, which maybe goes to show something is happening there behind the scenes, as in Checo ain't going anywhere, and he says there's a lot of agendas in this sport, such as maybe agendas for some to try and get back into the mix, but that seems kind of unlikely. The Red Bull situation though is complicated by also the fact that RB have struggled. I feel like this is a topic that most people aren't really talking about, but RB started the season pretty well. They were expected to start the season pretty well because lots of their car is based on, we believe, last year's RB19. They took as much as they could from the RB19 and from this year's RB20 as well, but the car has been kind of nowhere lately. At the start of the season they were able to regularly score points, now it's effectively disappeared. Yuki even says the car and the updates they brought to Monza were not even close to what they expected to see on the simulation data. Even their power unit has been having problems. Lawson was also in the VCarb 01 in a Pirelli tyre test at Monza. He drove the RB20 before to like 100 and I don't know how many laps he did. He did a lot of laps. But in the RB, he only got 76 laps in, which is more than a race distance, so it's a good amount of laps. But, I mean, still the engine had problems and they had to cut the session short. So it's not ideal on all fronts. And therefore it's worth noting, right, how AlphaTauri, as they were, and now RB, to my understanding, still use Red Bull wind tunnel as well as them, and we're now talking about correlation problems with that wind tunnel with the RB20, and it's happening at the same time that the RB is having massive problems as well. So those two factors are probably related, let's be real, the Red Bull fall off and the RB fall off. So it definitely makes you wonder whether it could be pointing towards the smoking gun of the wind tunnel issues or some sort of correlation problems. That didn't seem to exist, though, for the last 2 seasons, which is a little bit confusing. But this is what the Autosport article said, that Christian Horner says, that there is a clear problem in the disconnection between the front and the rear of the car. Our wind tunnel, though, doesn't say that we have that, but the track says that we have that. So we've got to get on top of that, because when you have that, you can't trust your tools. Then you've got to go back to track data and previous experience. This is where Mercedes were for effectively the last couple of years. Now Red Bull are, amazingly, let's be honest, in the same situation. So there's some sort of correlation issue with the wind tunnel, with what they see on the CFD, with what they see on track, and it's probably affecting right now both of their teams. That's how it looks. But this was the Formula Uno article talking about some of the other problems. In fact, it's interesting that RB say it's not unusual you find yourself with a different reading from your simulation tools and what the track says when things aren't working. That's actually Christian Horner, right, admitting after the race, but confirming this aspect of the correlation problems between the wind tunnel and between reality. And actually this article does even mention that they're also present on the Racing Bull side, and that is certainly not by chance either. But the key point is they have now an unstable rear end, and again people are going to talk about, maybe understandably, the whole asymmetric braking thing, because the rumour had it that it was asymmetric braking on the rear axle. Now all of a sudden they've got an unstable rear end. I mean, maybe 2 and 2 makes 5 in this case, but it's still a talking point, isn't it? So they've got big understeer, and the problem is that you've got understeer going into the corner, and as you come out of the corner, it then kicks to oversteer because the rear is unstable. A massive problem. The balance, they know the problem, right? And they understand the problem, but whether they can bring a solution, especially if their wind tunnel doesn't match what they see in reality, and their top guys are leaving, that's a bit of a challenge. So Washe, who leads the technical team, certainly now Newey is gone, has decided that yes, there will be in Austin a new technical package and a new floor basically for the car. So that's the plan. Whether it works, we'll see at the end of October. But this is the big point really. Pierre Washe has decided to move some resources, both human and economics and money and also people, back from 2025 to 2024. And this has been a big talking point of the last few years in Formula 1. The fact that last year's RB19 was so good that Red Bull could effectively give up working on it so long before anybody else could and start working working already on next year's 2024 car. Turns out this year's car they made some mistakes with, and they would love to be, as Ferrari are, I imagine, as McLaren are, as Mercedes are really, who have a better understanding of their machine right now, working on the 2025 machine to try and make a challenge for next year's title. Generally, the last year of a set of regulations, or the last couple of years, can produce banger seasons, and I'm sure that, you know, Ferrari, who aren't going to win this year's drivers, Mercedes, who aren't going to win this year's drivers, they want to find themselves in a position to be able to fight for that next year. Red Bull, a couple of months ago, would have been very confident that they would be able to easily just move on to 2025. This year's car's solid enough, but clearly they can't, because if they just work on next year's car without fully understanding and being able to solve what's gone wrong with this year's car, they are, you know, liable to make the same mistakes again. So they need to ensure, and Washay and Red Bull are not wrong to do this, but they need to ensure that they correct this bad development path they're currently on. The problem is that they've taken people and money that's dedicated to next year's car, designing things for that, and brought them back to this year's car. So they've got to use, you know, they can't develop as they want to for next year, and if those people can or cannot find a solution, the time and money they've wasted on next year's car may, you know, be able to thrown out the window, and they have to start again because there's a new understanding that they may gain at some point. So it's a massive problem. It's going to slow down their development. It means the RB21 is not going to be born with, you know, anywhere near the technical advantage that the RB19 was, for example, we would at least think, because the RB18 was clearly by the middle of the season the better car. They can start on the RB19 nice and early. They could start on the RB20 nice and early, but clearly have made some errors. The RB21, as a result, is, you know, it's going to be more competitive. There's no doubt it's going to be more competitive next season. Maybe Red Bull's RB21 is a great car again, but it's probably not going to be that much greater, if at all greater, than what the other teams come up with, right? So it throws Max's ambitions to go, you know, 5 in a row Drivers' Championships potentially not out of the window, but it definitely makes Max more concerned about the future. And obviously he's not won 4 in a row yet. That would happen in a couple of months, assuming that he holds on to the win, and assuming McLaren and Lando Norris keep on squandering opportunities to score more points. But very much interested your thoughts in the comments below. Horner as well was commenting on kind of Max's maturity in this whole situation, which it maybe is arguable, but nonetheless, like, he's putting his head down. I think he was back at the factory over the last couple of days as well, probably, you know, strapped in and basically chain locked to the simulator to do as you know, many laps as he can to try and help the team fix the car. But the reality is that Max may be a phenomenal driver, but he's not an engineer. He can't tell the guys exactly what to do. He can just tell them what the problems are, and it's on them to actually fix that. But very much interested your thoughts in the comments. Hit the like button if you enjoyed. Subscribe if you're new. Take care, and I'll see you next time.